Thank you very much. And yes, we are going to talk about connectivity in our last session. And obviously, thank you very much for all of you who stayed till the very end. But first, let me introduce our panelists to you. We have a fascinating gentleman around me. So, to my right, Stefan Stanislavski, who is the head of fiber strategy at PT Zambia, and Stefan, for the recent 4 years, was dealing with various FTTH fiber to the home projects in various countries. Piotr Muszyński is a Polish gentleman who occupied for a very long time various high positions in Orange. And currently he is the founder, co-owner, and CEO of the venture fund called FixMap. To my left, Shadi Mahassal, who is the co-founder and CEO of Surf and Code, which is a product studio which combines various startups and aiming at creating new projects and standalone businesses. And Sam Blackie, the partner in Deloitte, who is actually the lead partner in Deloitte in the EMEA economic consulting team, and who participated in a very interesting report about 5G at the request of the UK government. So, being a Ukrainian citizen, I was very, very interested to know from my colleagues from London office that under the recent announcement by the UK government made at the beginning of this year, actually, in the UK, 19 out of 20 households and businesses are now having ultra-fast broadband connection. This is, isn't it an amazing achievement that like over 95% of premises now have connection to very fast broadband. But probably we need to remember that it's like these figures and geographical coverage is not really always a true reflection of the technology penetration. So various governments are now racing for connectivity. We know that China is screaming about 5G, that South Korea has tried it, and a lot of governments have their own targets. So probably let's start our discussion. What shall take priority? 5G, fiber, fixed line, what? Yeah. But before starting this, let's maybe take a step back and understand why is connectivity such a hot topic. So, Shadi, maybe you can explain to the audience why we need so much a better connection, why we need to be connected, and why enhanced connectivity is so much important now.
Right. So in my world, I deal with a lot of founders who are innovating, bringing new business models to solve big problems. And oftentimes, those business models rely on ingenuity for applications or devices that alert us or assist us throughout the day. And increasingly, this is now no longer a science fiction thing. We now talk to things. We talk to each other through things. And everything around us is becoming connected, and that's the norm. From the smart doorbell to the smart security system at home, to the smart speakers, which are becoming everyday appliances, all the way to the cars. And when we look at the amount of data that these devices not only are consuming or generating, but require in terms of everyday updates, it's phenomenal. Smart cars, for example, by different measurements, consume somewhere between 100 gigabyte to 10 terabytes per day. That's data that they're generating, they're processing. A large part of it is not being transmitted. But that's just the cars today. Imagine if every car on the road is producing and transmitting even a fraction of that amount of data, what it would do to the networks that exist today. And that's not to mention the communication that the cars are doing among each other. So it's driving the connectivity need, not just in terms of 5G, but in terms of open spectrum technologies as well. We're seeing Wi-Fi not dying and continue to exist, and new other technologies that augment 5G, especially in crowded cities. It's not just about the connectivity as well, it's about the saturation within physical areas. If you have a traffic jam outside, that connectivity here is going to be jammed. And so solving that connectivity problem right here, right now, becomes a bigger problem than solving it across a city, for example. So all of this is happening around us every day, and it's happening at a faster scale than I think the networks are handling.
Yeah, thank you, Shadi. And given the amount of data produced by the cars specifically, yeah, and given all the developments of future developments like flying cars or even flying trains, which I saw yesterday on LinkedIn video, will in 30 or 40 years' time we live in smart cities? So we do need to have very smart cities to have everything connected and to make it work.
Well, smart cities by definition are evolutions of cities unless they die. Because with all the amount of data that you're going to generate, you're going to have the ability to process that data. Your definition of a traffic cop is going to change from a physical person putting out a parking ticket to a monthly, fine that is automatically bank transferred. So smart city definition is changing. It's also driving a lot of the need to make sure this connectivity is available. The best example for a smart city is the planning for smart cities is changing because of smart cars. You have a mass of cars that arrive in the morning to carry people to work. What are these cars going to do throughout the day while they're waiting for people to go? They're going to roam around the city, pick up people perhaps, or do shared mobility. And the city needs to be aware of where these cars are. So the real-time interactivity between the city, the private sector, and the individual, accessing to the same amount of data, to the same types of data for different purposes, is driving that smart city requirement.
Yeah, thank you. So speaking about enablers actually for connectivity, yeah, 5G is a super hot topic currently, and everyone is simply talking about 5G as the next generation of mobile networks, and definitely it has a potential to offer customers a very good enhanced new capabilities over the existing technologies. And I have a question, Sam, to you. Maybe for the benefit of the audience, you can explain what 5G is, because obviously this is not like 3+2. Yeah, this is the 5th generation of mobile networks, the next generation, and what benefits it can realize for the customers.
Okay. Well, I have to say, I'm quite glad you didn't start with me. You started with Shadi, who can probably give you better, much more eloquent example of the sort of really super cool things that 5G potentially adds. And I think 5G is one of those technologies that has the potential to bring out the inner geek in all of us. And as an economist and someone who works with Deloitte, the geek is definitely part of, a strong part of my DNA, so I can kind of relate to that. And there are all sorts of really cool applications. So you talked about some of them. There are some really amazing potential applications in relation to farming. If you ever look up a company called Moocool, they've got a fantastic website. It's all about how cows give birth and stuff like that. It sounds a bit weird, but have a look at their website. It's well worth a look. They've got some great videos. But the sort of benefits that come to 5G sort of come to 3 essential categories. There's the sort of enhanced speed of broadband, which I guess is probably where most of us think of as 5G. So it's essentially doing what we do now, but a bit faster. There's a second category, which is really about IoT, of increasing the number of devices that can be seamlessly connected within a particular place at a given time. And then there's the dramatic reduction in latency. And those are sort of 3 characteristics of 5G. Now, to many extents, those are simply an evolution of what is already happening in 4G. It's something doing 4G, but better. What I think is one of the defining characteristics of 5G is that unlike sort of 3G to 2G or 4G to 3G, where you're essentially replacing the existing technology, 5G, I think, will be a part of a mesh of different technologies that will coexist in the overall network to provide different forms of connectivity in different geographies. So you may well see 5G providing a partial solution to rural broadband where fibre is simply too expensive to roll out. But is 5G going to be the dominant technology for rural broadband? Probably not. You will almost certainly see a rollout of 5G in central London, where there's a high density population, high demand. Is it going to exist across the whole of London or across all the cities in the UK? Again, probably not. So that sort of meshing process, I think, is the critical element of 5G. That being said, and again, so coming back to, I try to take off the economist hat from time to time, but I always end up putting it back on again. I think one of the challenges is you can talk about individual benefits cases, and they all sound super cool, but actually demonstrating the quantum of those benefits, I think, is quite hard. And actually saying, well, is that benefit specifically tied to 5G, or could you do that with 4G with a bit more investment? Is one of those questions. I mean, perhaps some of my panelists can answer that one, but it's one of the things I struggle with. And the third and probably most fundamental question for me is I've seen very, very little evidence around the cost profile for 5G. What is it going to cost? How is it going to interact? And how does that play in with the benefits case? And I'm sure we'll come back to that when I think we're going to talk about regulatory models later. But that interaction between cost and benefits is, for me, one of the big unanswered questions that will really define whether this technology works or whether we really end up talking about 6G.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. So 5G is definitely a fascinating option, but still fiber is in demand, at least currently. So Stefan, my question to you is, what's the future of the fiber? Do you think 5G will replace fiber, or they will come along, as Sam said?
Well, I think I'm very skeptical about 5G. I'm still old enough to remember this thing created by big telcos called ISDN, which stood for still don't know. And it strikes me that I don't know exactly what problem 5G is trying to solve, because we are putting in my London project, I've got one in London as well as Zambia, a gigabit by default into flats and apartments, and then they put Wi-Fi or a network of Wi-Fi. So in the home and in the office, where most people spend most of their time, there is already a lot of capacity, and as fiber is deployed in other parts of the country and in Zambia. In Zambia, people spend a lot of money on mobile data. There's very little fixed infrastructure. We can put our own telegraph poles there, put fiber into a house with standard components, electronics. It's really a construction project. The electronic telecom bit is actually now quite simple to do. We can deliver massive capacity to each house, and they'll save money on the mobile bills, and they'll have a much better, much faster service with lower latency as well. So I don't see really what the case for 5G is, but whatever the big telcos spend on it, they're going to need a lot of fiber, and it has to go close to the customer. So that's fine. In fact, there's a friend of mine who built an open access network in Asia, and he had a great contract with a couple of mobile operators for what they called 4.5G to put stuff on his lampposts and so on. So I look forward to the big companies wasting money on 5G and giving me some anchor tenant contracts in the fiber networks that we built.
Yeah, thank you. So competition is really a driver for progress, right? So Piotr, how do you think, would fixed line ever be able to compete with 5G?
Wrong question. I'll put the question opposite. Whether 5G will ever compete with the fixed networks. Because I'm very hands-on, because I used to work as a CTIO 8 years in a company which deployed so far almost 4 million households passed, so range of households in Poland in fiber. I was in charge personally in deploying LTE in the country. We created a common network with T-Mobile in Poland, actually, the only one existing still in Europe. What I'm saying is based on my personal experience. Today, what we see the evolution. It's part of the maybe answer for Stefan's question. This is an evolution based on the demand-based evolution. We have a number of data which are created by the users. And usually, so far, we're building the networks like a solution, human to human. Today, first time 5G, we are starting to build a solution for the machines. We created machines, and now machines are so demanding in terms of the coverage, KPIs, because we expect them to do, that we are designing the 5G network for the machines, for the IoTs, for the different sensors which will be working in the cities, in the transportation, in the villages, in the production, in the factory. We are creating the environment when the machine will talk to the machine will be ordering the capacity to other machine, completely agnostic from the human intervention perspective. So That's more or less why we need 5G. 5G is also bringing other elements, other KPIs, which are strongly related to, for example, the autonomous transportation. We are talking about a milliseconds latency. If we'll not achieve 1 millisecond latency, can you imagine what will happen with the autonomous cars on the streets? They will be killing people and crashing each other. There will be a lot of fun in the streets. Good for the content producers. So from my perspective, we're talking about the evolution of the network as a whole, because fiber gives a major advantage to the future radio access networks, which is transmission, which is, in a matter of fact, the capacity. So radio is giving a coverage. Fiber is giving a capacity. If we will not simultaneously develop the coverage and the capacity, and will not face the problems which are related to the exponential growth of the data and connected objects in a given area, then we'll fail with all the plans related to the future 4.0 economy.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, we hear a lot of discussions about launching 5G in various countries and very CEE in terms of improving connectivity in terms of 5G.
And I think that today in CEE, as whole Europe, you have the agenda for the European Union. So far, so good for UK as well, before the Brexit. But we'll have a quite sustainable plan for deploying 5G and fiberization of our networks, which are related to the European Union agenda, single market, and the 5G plan, which is very much related also to standardization and availability of standard solutions for the new technologies. So it will not happen like the revolution. Suddenly it will land a big plane in the middle of the town and then we'll have a 5G working from the next day. No, it won't. It's an evolution. We will be driving there through the agenda. First of all, as I said, based on the standardization. And standardization for 5G goes on now at least 3 years. So it's still ahead of us. Availability of the spectrum, 700 megahertz availability at most. And then also, as I said, single market and the policy of the European Union and the local regulators to unlicensed spectrum, because 5G will be based on the unlicensed spectrum at most. So we are building today something what we call a road to 5G, which is based on LTE development. Because now we are building LTE Advanced. Some people are saying this is 4.5. And then we will be having, after the aggregation of the different spectrum layers, we will increase the throughputs on the radio. We will be landing on something like the LTE Advanced Plus 4.8. And then we will be entering the 5G ecosystem, having in mind the fact that so far between 2014 and 2019, in all Europe, we spent 144 billion euro for fiber networks, and we expect to add to those investments around 225 billion euro for 5G deployment only.
Thank you. It's just very valid points because, like, for instance, in Ukraine, we are just stepped in the 4G era. Quite late, but due to some political reasons, it just was launched 6 months ago, and yeah, we did not even start talking about 5G, just primarily because we don't know what spectrum to allocate to that. Yeah, they just don't know, yeah, as well as in other countries. So of course we will be following the Europe, yeah, but generally it's like in our big country like Ukraine, it's still not there. So Shadi, you are an investor, yeah, and there are quite a number of technologies to invest in terms of connectivity. As an investor, what technologies do you see as the most promising, and actually where you would invest your own money?
Well, we're product people. So for us, innovation comes either in the technology itself that solves big problems or in the business model innovation, both of which aren't happening in a sort of a fixed line scenario. So for us, we see the wireless applications using wireless as the most prominent, especially ones that are coming due to future infrastructure. One of the companies, for example, that we are looking at right now is based in Germany that is building a teleoperations platform for autonomous vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
When these things, if they ever break down, somehow it needs to be guided home. And you're not going to ship a tow truck or a driver to go do that. To do teleoperation, you have to have reliable connectivity. Otherwise, this thing is running on its own. And over many highways, there are no reliable 5G, 4G, 3G, or any G. So finding that problem, solving that problem, may require a multitude of technologies. But it's a technology. It's an application that's driving the innovation. For us, it's primarily wireless.
Indeed. So wireless, and okay, and given there is still a lot of work to do in this area, my primary question is to Sam probably, but other panelists please join if you have thoughts. Do you think, Sam, the regulatory framework, the current regulatory framework is ready for the connected future?
So I think before we come on to the regulatory framework, can I just add a little bit more on the sort of the case for 5G? Because I think there's a degree of scepticism on this panel, which, to be honest, I share, but let's park that. If you cross the river and you can go to the National Theatre and you watch the Lehman trilogy, and there's this, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's this fantastic piece in it where they talk about investment in the railways. And the reality is, a few hundred years ago, you wouldn't invest in the railways, you'd be absolutely crazy to. But if you were the one person who did it, you made a bucket load of money. And the same way, same with the internet. Zuckerberg, for all his challenges he may have on a regulatory basis at the minute, is not short of cash, right? So, and that relies on technology that 20 or 30 years ago simply wasn't there. So I think the sort of our track record as sort of professionals of picking the right technologies is not fantastic. And as an economist, I'm even worse than the rest of you. But there is a question about, is it there's a build it and people will come, or is it actually and if you're talking about a major change in technology, will you ever really have a robust business case? And I would question whether that's going to be the case. In terms of the regulatory model, I think there are essentially three challenges. The first is about the kind of the returns, and there's this kind of general trend in the markets where there's a reluctance amongst consumers to pay for the pipe. That's become commoditized, and that's essentially the price has been competed away. And there's been a increasing value taken by the services that sit over the top. And at the minute, there's not really an alignment between the two. And it seems to me the incremental costs of 5G require that somehow to be rebalanced. And it may be that there's some way that the operators can capture some of that through pricing. But my suspicion is there is going to need to be some change to the regulatory framework to facilitate that, whether that be facilitating vertical sharing of revenues, whether that be slightly longer price control periods or whatever. I think that's one key element. The second element is really about sort of antitrust policy. So everything that I hear when I talk to people who are considering investing in 5G is that it will drive, partly as a function of costs, but also the technology, an increase in integration in terms of both network sharing and spectrum sharing and so forth between the operators. And that raises questions of collusion and all sorts of other things that follow from that. So that's a separate problem. And the third issue, I think, is how you generate the best value from the technologies that follow from this. So we've done a number of pieces of work with the National Infrastructure Commission, Vodafone and others looking at IoT and data sharing. And just to give you an example, one of the data points we came up with was we estimated over the next 10 years, we thought if Europe got data sharing right through IoT, and by this I mean non-personal data rather than personal data, you could add about 1.5 trillion to the European GDP, which sounds dramatic, but actually if you look at it in terms of the totality of GDP is quite modest. Nevertheless, it's significant. And to do that, you really need to have a model that facilitates data sharing between operators, both vertically, so thinking about people who manufacture cars and people who manufacture components between them, how do they share data effectively in a way that makes competition work and also allows sort of innovation, and horizontally, with it be like farmers understanding weather patterns, for example. And if you get that right, there's a huge benefit to do that. And again, I think the Commission has done a lot of work on this. we've given them some suggestions. It went down quite well, I think, but there's definitely more in that space.
Yeah, thank you. And
I mean,
Yes,
just
yeah.
to elaborate on my earlier skepticism, I mean, because as a small company, we have to use technologies that simply work out of the box. And fibre really is all about construction first and then selling to get customers on. Now, we are building open access networks, and that means that the likes of MTN or Vodafone, the big companies, can use those networks to provide services, and we would love to have them as tenants. So if they come up with an offer which is somehow fixed and mobile combined, I don't mind, you know, that's great. If we have a technology, if the 5G is in unlicensed spectrum bands and it's able to be used by smaller companies, whether it's us or a service provider, to extend the reach of the network cost effectively, we'll use it. It's just that I don't see that today or next year.
yeah, it's a long
But you know, I think there's some kind of a hybrid approach is obviously has a lot of merit, but all of that 5G stuff needs fibre somewhere near where the access point is. And you know, I know that an engineer would dispute it's like Wi-Fi, but I just see it as a similar thing to Wi-Fi. It's a little box with some radio. Maybe it goes a bit further, a bit less far. Maybe the latency is a lot better. But if there's unlicensed spectrum or lightly regulated spectrum, then companies like ours can make use of that, and we can drive it from the bottom up. And I think one of the big mistakes, if you like, in spectrum policy in the past was to overemphasize the auction process to big companies and totally lose any interest whatsoever in the innovation ground up. And that's I don't know enough about 5G, but my feeling is it's big company, national policy driven, and actually you get innovation by doing it not like that. That's
Yeah, thank you.
on the basis of zero evidence.
I'm being told that we have just 2 minutes left, so just to wrap up, I have one common question to each of you. If you had to guess, do you think 6G will ever be launched, and if yes, in what year? Sam.
So, if I had to guess, I would say 6G is much more likely to see than 5G in about 10 years' time.
Shadi.
I'm probably going to go maybe no longer than 10 years. I'll go below.
Stefan.
I think you've got lots of people in marketing and vendors and operators will have 5.5G probably next year, and 6G will be announced the year afterwards.
Cool.
It won't mean anything.
Piotr?
It will happen in 10 years' time, for sure.
So you'll have to get us back to see if we were right.
Well, Moore's law has already proven itself, and it's accelerating. So you put out anything that requires bandwidth, you buy more bandwidth.
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
Last but not least, we have to remember that all of us we are very eco. So we take care about the pollution today, but we have to also raise the point, and it will be one of the most important point, what with the electronic pollution. So electromagnetic field emission. We have limits. There are limits today in the regulations all over the Europe, all over the world. And we have to remember that the number of different radio BTSs which will appear in a 5G, 6G will bring this question on the table. And this is one of the showstoppers of future development.
Thank you very much. Thank you.